As we know, the brighter a lady shines, the faster she may burn.
And welcome back to Vox Podcast, the weekly pseudo-academic roundtable pop culture analysis with drinking and swearing. My name is Christopher Maverick, but you can call me Mav, and I am once again here with my co-hosts, Katya and Hannah. How's it going, guys?
It's going? I don't respond to that question anymore. It's like, it's the same every week where it's like, could be worse, could be better.
I feel like
nothing
we need
has
to
changed.
I know it's a polite question, but I feel like we need to change the question, like, what was your favorite Bernie meme? Even though that's like super old now, but you know what? It never gets old. It's never getting old. It's amazing.
I mean, it made more sense in the days when we used to do stuff between shows other than sit there and hope the world didn't burn fire.
Like things change. It's like, at least, aside from like the things happening outside my apartment, what happens inside my apartment? It's like, well, I watched some TV, I played some video games, I sewed some things, I did my job, and I slept and ate, and then repeat for an entire year with very little change.
Something did happen in my apartment that has changed.
What's that?
Josh and I compromised, and instead of not getting rid of the Christmas tree until like March, we got rid of it today. So I vacuumed up the pine needles, and we don't have a Christmas tree, but because they're cheerful, we kept up the banister lights.
It's going to be great because this show airs like 2 weeks after we recorded it. So people were like, you took down your Christmas tree in mid-February, and then
still earlier than usual.
People, especially with like faux trees, they are still up. They are not taking them down because you know what? As we've mentioned on previous podcasts, 2020 with bangs is so far. I mean, it's an improvement. It's an improvement.
I'm just going to admit that my tree is still up, and as we record, and it may or may not be up by the time it comes out.
We all need some festive stuff in our lives at the moment, and if that means a Christmas tree stays up until March, so be it. You know,
that's what I said. So hence banister lights, which I'm pretty sure are going to stay up till forever.
Does that mean that you're prepared for a Regency ball, but with sparkly lights?
There's the transition. There you go. What are we talking about this week, Hannah?
I can't believe we're doing this. I can't believe you guys agreed. We're doing Bridgerton.
Excuse me. Okay, wait. Whoa. In what capacity are you surprised that we're doing a show, like an episode about this?
Let me rephrase.
This seems obvious. As soon as this show came out, I was like, oh, clearly we're doing an episode.
It's not so much about me. It's that I purposely oversold it on the Things You Missed episode. And as I was like overselling it, I was in the back of my mind going, I don't know how Katya is going to feel about this. Because like literally like the first like major scene is someone being stuffed into a corset. And like, and there we go. So
before we get too far, hold on. Let's introduce you guys.
I did it, you guys.
We're going into full like spoiler territory. And okay, so first off, before people get too far into the show, A, you should be watching Bridgerton. B, if you haven't watched Bridgerton, go watch it because we're about to spoil the fuck out of it. C, I know you're going to say, or at least some of our audience is going to say, there's no superheroes in this and this is stupid. Tough shit. Go watch Bridgerton anyway. Okay, so it's awesome. So before that, let us introduce the guests. So we had a call for comments, and we had people who were interested in the show because Hannah was underestimating us, and there's definitely an audience for the show. I mean, it's the most popular show on Netflix right now.
I was not underestimating our audience.
We're underestimating us personally.
Okay, let's understand why this is surprising, but we should introduce our guests.
All right.
Please go for it, Matt.
Returning to the show, we have Nicole Freim, who's been on several times before, our good friend. How's it going, Nicole?
It's about the same as she was saying. Well, I'm still existing. My Christmas tree is still up. And yes, I've read all of the books multiple times long ago. And don't get me started on how the corset thing is in it.
Oh, I guess we should probably link in the show notes our corset episode that we've had,
which is mainly just Katya ranting with support from people who actually know what they're talking about because they're fashion researchers.
Well, speaking of that, I want to introduce our second guest, an old friend of mine who I know has not only thoughts on Bridgerton, but many thoughts on corset. I'd like to welcome Sarah Presogna to the show. Hey, Sarah.
Oh, hi, everyone.
And I won't ask you how you're doing. I'll just say, are you still alive and is your tree still up? Because they ruined the whole fun of the how you doing.
Alive, and my mom came planting a bunch of seeds. So I'm like already on to.
Oh, yeah. I guess we should let people know what you do. Sarah, what do you do for a living?
Me, well, I'm kind of like a park ranger, but also my husband owns a farm, and sometimes I squish for money.
You made that sound like way less interesting than it actually is. But yeah, you play with plants, and you're a park ranger, which is actually interesting. Yeah, and so for context, of the corset joke that I made, I know Sarah because in another life, I guess you'd say you used to be because you don't really do it anymore. You were a model when I was a photographer.
So I did used to be a model, but then you turned 35 and nobody cares about that anymore.
I care. I love you. You know that. I always will. But yeah, Sarah had many thoughts on corsets back when we would work together. And beyond that, when Hannah posted the Bridgerton blog, she immediately had thoughts. But we should note that you said that your husband owns a farm. You are on a farm right now. Your internet is spotty. And so if Sarah suddenly disappears from the show, that's why, right?
Exactly.
So
she's also a superhero, and something more important happened.
She was a superhero, or is? I mean, I guess like. So
do you stop being a superhero? I feel like that's not a thing. If you have at some point been a superhero, I don't care if it was as a cosplay or whatever. Yeah.
Among other things, while we were working together with photography stuff, I also used to write a comic strip with Maximilian, the guy who does our theme song, and Sarah was the model for one of the characters in that. So she is a cosmic Hellcat as well.
Superhero.
Yeah. So yes, she was actually super. But Bridgerton's not about superheroes, or at least not really. What is Bridgerton about?
It is a series of romance novels that's been turned into one of the most popular Netflix series ever at this point. Renewed for season 2 with the worst character of the series being featured.
Okay, I'm gonna let you finish, but I have questions about that statement.
Okay. I'm going my worst character. I mean, the worst of the Bridgertons, not like Nigel Burbrook. Who the creators describe as a incel. That is interesting. But actually, I think that a lot of people have been surprised by Bridgerton because one, a lot of people don't expect romance novels to make money, which is wrong. Because look at
enduring literary genres in Western literature.
Mm-hmm.
Two, people are like, this is set in the Regency. Why is there a bunch of sex? And people have.
Well, everybody knows sex wasn't invented until 1997, so you know.
And actually, I know that people compare it to Jane Austen because Jane Austen is kind of like the big Regency thing everyone knows. But if you are an 18th century-esque person like me, you might think about novels like Love in Excess by Eliza Haywood, which honestly feels like much sexier than Bridgerton at some points. And there's a lot of sex going on and a lot of what we would call, I guess, soapy plot lines now. And also Bridgerton has tackled subjects like class, race, and gender head on. So it's also interesting for what it is or is not saying. And we should talk about it.
And it's lots of pretty people fucking, which is what the show was.
So pretty dresses. So many pretty dresses. Which, one of the things I think was really great about, we've talked about the courses episode as well as several other episodes. I watch DIY sewing YouTube a lot of that is historical costumers who make really awesome, like crazy stuff based on actual historical research. And a lot of people did reaction videos to Bridgerton fashion. One of the things that made me like recognize is how many people seem to not click to the fact that Bridgerton is basically like an alternate history. I thought that maybe the like racial aspects would have,
yes.
right, the black guy, and like the fact that they acknowledge like that's not just a casting, like I mean it is a casting decision to try and make it more diverse, but it also like there are narrative reasons, like it's not just like
kinda
like, it's part of the show basically.
Yeah it's
Because
mentioned
people
like
were critiquing
in weird ways,
right,
Yeah,
because
I want to get into some of those moments later, but go ahead. Sorry.
but there were people that were critiquing like, oh well, glitter wasn't a thing back then, and basically all the costumers were like who normally rip apart like you know Ugg boots being used in fashion, and they're like no, this is basically sci-fi meets Regency.
Okay, look,
which means we get to have glitter
either, so let's just go with it. All right.
It's like this is the time for us to live all of our costuming fantasies of glitter and Regency and all of these things, and we're gonna go with it and stop raining on our parade. Damn it! That surprised me. I thought like the alt history aspect was fairly obvious, but it seems like a lot of viewers maybe didn't, at least initially, click to that.
I think some people were thinking of it as, well, this is period, so it must be like Jane Austen, like Sense and Sensibility, like Pride and Prejudice, because that's what they think of. And then, of course, they're like, well, but that's not how it would have been. They didn't get it initially, I don't think. In fact, I mean, Julia Quinn was interviewed and, you know, brings this up in an article that it is, like you said, it's kind of like alternative. It's speculative. It's fantasy.
Yeah, and I just for the show notes, an interview with the costume designer is like, I was inspired by the historical aspects, but I also decided to, you know, lean into the fact that it is speculative and, you know, go with some like louder colors and do like something different with this. And like you when you read the interview with her, you can tell that the choices were intentional and that they thought carefully about what to change and what not to change.
I think people have like this weird purist reality when it comes to like Regency era, because everybody's read Jane Austen and they've all seen Mr. Darcy come out of the water. And so everybody thinks they're expert on what Regency period is. But when you have other like period costumer making definite like costuming decisions for that were way outside the bounds of what actual Victorian costume was. And nobody seemed to care.
A lot of that is because people don't know what these fashion periods are. Like my favorite example is always like the 1920s and flappers, because like I think that's something that a lot of people think that they know what a flapper looks like, but they think of what they actually think is a flapper is basically the Halloween costume version, which is a mini skirt, which wasn't a thing until like the 60s and 70s. Whereas like what was considered a short skirt in the 20s was like calf length.
Right. Well, and that was my thought, because if you're talking about, I mean, what Sarah was saying, like I think people have this idea of, oh, well, the Regency didn't look like that because Regency looked like, and what they mean is Regency looked like Keira Knightley and only Keira Knightley. And that's my idea of exactly what that time period looked like. Everyone was Keira Knightley because that's or, you know, Colin Firth or whatever. But like, that's the idea that people have in their head is like 4 movies. It's just, you know, and I think that, I think it is very specific. Right. One story told like 4 times in 4 movies. And that's like all people point to, as though there were no variety. We talked on another episode about how people didn't realize that color existed before, you know, the year 1900.
And you know, Jane Austen is like dirtier than a lot of people give her credit for, to be honest. Also B.
About this.
Okay, so like in Sense and Sensibility, first of all, everybody has like some sort of erotic energy going on. Like Eleanor and Colonel Brandon are not like interested in each other at all, but it makes sense that they would kind of get together. There's also like a lot of aborted love plots. Plus, in that novel, you have like multiple illegitimate children and a lot of like sex before marriage. I've heard the theory multiple times, both in fan circles and in academic circles, that the reason why Marianne is sick is because she's miscarrying Willoughby's baby. And when they were like running around alone, they were fooling around. And I think that's a legitimate reading. I mean, there's other things like
that 100% makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, like it would go with like other books of the period. Love and Excess, which I mentioned. There's actually a plot line where the male hero accidentally sleeps with the wrong woman. She gets pregnant and she doesn't get shunned. She marries someone else and gets away with like fooling him. So like she's fine and secure, which, you know, you might assume based on Sense and Sensibility that if you got pregnant out of wedlock, you were a fallen woman, to borrow some of the terms of the period, and your options were extremely limited and you would die because, you know, women who have sex out of wedlock in the 19th century are assumed to die in poverty or, you know, it's into Australia or something. Also, you know, like I do like want to just put one more note in the chat. Bianca Hernandez Knight, who is a writer, huge Jane Austen fan, works very carefully to talk about inclusivity in communities. I spent a lot of time talking about like gatekeeping and Bridgerton in relation to the costumes, partially because costumes were a coded way that people started criticizing the series when they saw that it had a multiracial cast and there were racist undertones. And just, you know, like there's talk about like what gatekeeping is and like what is like being a good community member. So just another note. I'm not gonna lie, warning for listeners, I have done so much research in advance of this episode that you're going to be overwhelmed with footnotes, and I'm sorry to my hosts and the guests if it's overwhelmingly annoying. I'm just very excited because so many people have like put up such good takes.
I have a question though. So, okay, you know, we made the jokes about how Hannah didn't think anybody was going to want to do the show. Obviously, we're, you know, well, it's pop culture, so Katya and I are going to jump on it regardless. And Wayne actually as well, though he's busy today, so he's not here. This was, I want to say surprisingly popular, but I don't think it's like surprising that the show did well. There have been other shows like this. I mean, isn't there a version of Emma on Apple TV that's doing well right now for what it is? I think what surprised people was it became the number one show and relatively quickly. So it did super well for not having superheroes in it. Is basically what it came down to.
We've seen a string of this, though, or at least an emerging string of this. Like Queen's Gambit was the other one, which also like they're very different TV shows in some respects, but I think especially like the strong aesthetics, especially like the period costuming, even though that's more modern in the 60s. Like I think it's just there's an appeal for like there's a documented appeal for this stuff. Also, like Bridgerton is just fun. And escapism, like, and we're all glued to our streaming devices anyway.
What I was wondering is, you know, is it also partly that, you know, it stars girls, you know, like,
yes.
like it, you know, it's not only does it star women, it's a particularly stereotypically girly genre, both of them, right?
I think this
Even
gets
though
into
it was written by a man.
It gets into the bias against romance novels, that romance novels are by women and for women, and therefore they are less substantive than literary fiction. And so you're just so used to being treated
starring Iron Man. Yeah.
You know, as lesser that it's I think that's part of it, that people are going, oh, wait a minute, this is fun, right? That, I thought romance novels were just, you know, quote, for bored housewives or something like that.
But I mean, there's the star power of Shonda too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like, I think that there are, I started watching Grey's Anatomy and I was like, yeah. And then it got weird and I stopped. And, you know, I watched a little bit of How to Get Away with Murder and then I stopped. I was really curious how she was going to approach a period piece. And then I kept watching it because it was so good. But I probably wouldn't have started if it wasn't for that curiosity.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if the nice thing about Bridgerton was it was 8 episodes that dropped all in one day. So it's not like Grey's Anatomy where you watch for 3 years and then you just kind of, I guess I'm not into this anymore. You know, can it keep your attention for 24, 48, hours. 72 hours? Yeah. However long it takes you to get through it, you know.
Yeah, like one of the things is also when you contextualize this particular show, I think within like the longer history of television, it doesn't surprise me actually at all, and of literature actually, because like we know historically romance novels, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, like we know historically like they are very popular and persistent genres, more so than I think like romance and science fiction of the like non-literary genres, which I have thoughts about, but anyway, like are some of the most persistent and popular. So like we know that there's a very established, like honestly, like over a century long documented market for it. Also, when we look at like serialized television, historically, the primary viewers of serialized television have been women. Because a lot of that had to do with like the politics of like daytime television back when we, were in the pre-streaming days. But when daytime television originally emerged, like the primary target audience was people that were at home during the day, which tended to be housewives. So, which is why we like romance sitcoms, things like that relate that related to that audience were popular and like the dominant form of a lot of serialized television. And that even though that's changed drastically in the latter half of the 20th century and the 21st century, like I think that still is a holdover. Also, like that market never went away, even as I think the shows that I think have been made for direct streaming audiences, like the Netflix shows, haven't maybe always tapped into that market. I think all we're seeing is that like Netflix between like Queen's Gambit, but I think Bridgerton even surprises me less than Queen's Gambit. It's like they're tapping into what to me is like a pretty safe bet in terms of like, this is a historically persistently popular genre that they've reimagined, I think, pretty well for a modern audience.
I will say upfront that some of the titles I'm about to list are also like not romances per se, but it feels like every few years Hollywood forgets that like women can support films more or less, and they're like, oh, well, what do you mean that The Hunger Games did well? What do you mean that Twilight did well? What do you mean that 50 Shades of Grey did well? Which, like, I'm not endorsing necessarily all of those things as great art, but
I'm gonna make us do a 50 Shades show one of these days, just cause.
I do not want to read that. I don't want to read it. It's 500 pages and it's terribly written. No, say Suicide Squad, which was definitely not what anyone would call great art, or
not at all.
Or any one of those interchangeable shooter movies, or even the Fast and Furious film.
I can't believe you haven't seen.
Anyway.
But like no one but Vin Diesel, from what I understand from Mav, would argue that Fast and Furious is great art. But also no studio is going to hesitate to greenlight another one, as we have seen from how many they've been made. So it's just an infuriating argument to me that we have to make over and over, that women have buying power. Yeah, we like enjoy things, and also like dudes enjoy like quote traditionally female art too. Like
I'm here. Yes, exactly. I'm here.
Right.
I mean, but that's the question, right? Like genre fiction always has this problem, right? Oh my God, wow, we've made a successful science fiction movie in 1978, and and then they were surprised again in 1980, and then now by the time you hit 2021, it's like, yes, all movies are science fiction. Science fiction movies you expect to do well, right? But it took a while. Superhero movies until 2008, it took a while before people took them seriously. This is not the first, I'm going to put in scare quotes, female targeted media that did well. Grey's Anatomy is on like season 57, or I think it's like legit 17. We figured 17. It out before. Yeah. 17. So it's been going for a while. Shonda has, she is a very successful producer and showrunner. She's good at what she does. And she has achieved a crossover audience. And okay, sure, maybe Grey's Anatomy isn't, I don't know what's the biggest show in the air. Big Bang Theory used to be, but it's not the biggest show in the air, but it's up there enough that it shouldn't be surprising that, oh my God, Shonda has another hit, should be like, well, duh, because everything that she's done has turned to gold like that. And yet every single time it's like, oh my God, how did we get people to watch Bridgerton? And that's what I'm wondering, right? Like, is it really surprising that men watched it? I mean, men other than me, because I'm, a 14-year-old girl. But I mean, like, is it really surprising that there were other men who were into this show? Or is it us having preconceived notions about the audience that like aren't fair?
I think it's an interesting question, because honestly, the men I know that have watched Bridgerton, which, okay, small sample size, like all of them are either cultural studies people or are partners of cultural studies people or of fashion people. Like I know a lot of Okay, but still father of cultural studies person. Actually, I would be willing to bet my parents have watched it because my dad's favorite TV show is Downton Abbey.
Okay, another one, yeah.
Like Cliffhanger, he was obsessed. My dad actually watches more romance movies than anyone in my family.
See, I wasn't a big fan of Downton Abbey, but Downton Abbey, good example, did obscenely well. So if Downton Abbey can do well, why are we surprised that Bridgerton can do well? Like,
I think that the answer is
people really surprised.
I'm not surprised.
I'm not surprised.
Okay.
Like it honestly seems like a pretty safe bet to me. Although, okay, I do want to say though, I think one of the interesting things about the conversation we're having right now is that it's kind of also built into the show. And I'd be interested to hear for folks that have read the books, like if this is also true of the books, but the whole like gossip rag thing and like conceit in this show, I love.
Oh yeah.
And I'm kind of curious about what other people think about it because like I really appreciated it because it's like, okay, like we're looking at a period where like periodicals, like emergent periodical culture, and like, I mean, they're not. Is this okay, Hannah? You know much more about this period and what the appropriate terminology is because I was about to say broadsides. That's not the word.
Well, wait, hold on though. Good question though. Who has read? I've read the first book. Sarah, have you read any of them?
I have not read them. No, this is the first I've actually even known about them.
Okay, Katya, you've not read none, and Hannah, Nicole, you said you've read them.
Yeah, in fact, I've read, I think, almost everything Julia Quinn's written.
Okay, so you're not a novice in them.
She's the expert. I have read up to book number 4, which is actually the book that you discover who Lady Whistledown is, which we're going to review on the show.
So
It's a little they tease that.
Mm-hmm. I guess one of the things I was wondering about, like the sort of like Lady Whistledown like gossip column, like I know that there's like society in the Regency period, like there are like society columns and things like that. But like, I guess, is this also a fantasy element of the show? Because I don't know I don't know much about the periodical, like Regency periodical culture to know. But I think it's just fascinating. I really enjoy it. Are you asking
if it's a big deal in the books, or are you asking if it was a big deal in real life?
Well, I'm asking if it's like, is this a thing that has historical precedent? And I'm also wondering if like the same thing, I'm assuming the same or similar thing plays out in the books where like reality is shaped around print culture and specifically lowbrow print culture, because that's what gossip columns are.
Well, having read only the first one, she is a presence in the book, but a much smaller presence than she was in the TV show, at least for me. So I'm curious. I mean, like, so she is at the beginning of chapters, there's a paragraph each time from her column, and then people are just mad about it. But it's not like an ongoing mystery in the first book, the way I imagine, just based on how the series went and hints from the first book, how much it will be in later books. Nicole,
I love how it basically gleaned, and like that whole idea of it was basically a complete ripoff of Gossip Girl. Like,
yeah, the way it was
very
structured
much
in the show.
like gossip. Yeah, and I love that it was Julie Andrews because I thought that was just such a great touch.
That honestly was like the best casting.
Oh my God, it was perfect.
Yeah. Well, I think in the time period, gossip sheets were, I don't know that they were necessarily, shaped the community. I mean, sort of like shaped events the way you're saying. But I do know, especially, I mean, if you read excerpts, the convention was to not mention people by name. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's sort of part of the twist, right? Of I'm going to name everybody just flat out.
And that was mentioned in the book too. The book does say that her popularity is where most gossip sheets say Lord R or Lady W. Whistledown just flat out says, yeah, Anthony Bridgerton. That's who this was. It was Anthony Bridgerton, and I saw him do this. So that was one of the things that made her special.
That she has a smaller role in the books, that it's more reporting. I mean, you see the people reacting to it a lot, right? In book 2, one of the characters counts every time she has been mentioned down, right? That she keeps track of that. But yeah, it's not, and especially the whole plot with the queen, and we need to uncover who it is. That's That's created strictly for the show.
Is Whistledown the same person?
The books, yes.
It is.
Okay.
Interesting. I thought that was really... I didn't... Yeah.
You don't find out until book 4.
In the first book, Penelope is mentioned like 4 times. Like she's there.
Gotcha.
She exists. The feather, but
she's not
it's
a main
not
character.
Nobody's a main character except for Daphne and Simon. Like it's Daphne and Simon's story, and then her brothers and sisters are there, and they appear as necessary to progress their story. And then like the Featheringtons live next door, so they're mentioned a couple times. You see them at balls. Most of their subplots are not in the first book at all. As I understand it, they're ripped from later books.
Yeah, there's the showrunner has given a lot of interviews, Chris Van Dunsen, and he's mentioned that he wanted to expand the world because it was a TV show, even if they're trying to follow the sort of, one book, one Bridgerton kind of thing. I put, by the way, in the show notes, more on scandal sheets in relation to Bridgerton. But I do want to talk about the difference between Lady Whistledown in the show and the books a little bit, because mostly about the show, because it seems like Lady Whistledown, not being an expert, but reading up to book 4, where we do recognize it's Penelope, just like they revealed in season 1. Whistledown seems much crueler in the TV show.
She's got more personality, certainly.
I read the 4th book yesterday, so it's fresh in my mind. But the entire time, it was like emphasizing that Lady Whistledown doesn't pick on like the invisible people. Lady Whistledown is only cruel to those who are cruel, like Cressida Cowper. She has never revealed anything personal, and that is strictly not true based solely on the new plot line with Marina Thompson and how Penelope uses her role as Lady Whistledown after she promises Marina she won't say anything to reveal that Marina is pregnant and trying to trick Colin Bridgerton into marriage. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge change with a lot of implications that I really think are worth taking a look at that plot line and talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
It does really change it, because if you know what's coming, if you know that Penelope is Lady Whistledown, you really sort of feel that, wow, she crossed a line. Mm-hmm. And you do see that she's upset about it, like when she goes and sort of cries on Eloise's shoulder about it. But you're right. When she did that, I thought, wow, she's being mean. Mm-hmm. You said Whistledown in the TV show is a bit more mean. And even publishing that stuff about Nigel Burbrook and his kid in the country, was a little pointed. That usually in the excerpts, Whistledown is a bit more suggestive, but not direct.
So I wonder if we're moving into, and this is going to make this sort of an interesting thing, because we usually have this conversation, at least on our show, about adaptations of like superhero stuff, right? Like where we're talking about, well, this isn't how Iron Man really did this. This isn't what Spider-Man really did. And it's not. It's an adaptation, right? It's a different reimagining. And again, I've only read 1 book out of, I think there are 7 main books in the short story book in the series. So like 8.
8 Bridgertons, 8 books.
Okay. So I've read 1 out of the 8, right? So of those, like, if they'd done a direct translation of that first book, because it is very much a Daphne point of view, almost everything is just her story, it would have made, frankly, for boring television. Like, if you're going to do an ensemble cast, the way the story, and I enjoyed the series much more, the TV series much more than I enjoyed the book, with a few exceptions that we'll talk about in a little bit. I greatly preferred the way it unfolded on TV, but it has to be different, and they are different characters. Like, I'm not arguing that adaptation should be different. What I'm saying is because it's different, the implication is different. Yeah. And the fact that like Penelope throws her friend under the bus, and like if you read a Jane Austen novel, you know what happens to women. If you watch the series, you'll see Portia Featherington take Marina out into the street where they're like into a working class neighborhood, and show her like children begging and being like, this is what awaits you if you don't agree to marry this awful man who treats you like
property and like looks at your teeth. And which, you know, Marina is played by a Black woman, which also has other implications, as many people have written about. So,
well, I found everybody crueler on the TV show, which I liked mostly. I mean, like Nicole and you and I were talking about this sort of offline before we recorded. I found just in general, everyone dislikable on TV in a way that made them more interesting to me as characters, which is to say I like them as characters, but everyone has more of a reason for me to not find them to be wonderful people than I do in the book. Daphne has flaws in the TV series that she does not have in the book. Simon is meaner. Whistledown is obviously meaner. Penelope being Whistledown, I assume is meaner because I've literally not had a line from her in the book because she's only appeared 4 times, like just sort of off page.
I think you're right. Because you're right. We were talking about that the characters in the books, like when you, I don't remember if it was Hannah or Katya who said the least favorite character is getting the next series. Anthony was not nearly that much of an asshole in the book.
No, he's not. He's loving. Yeah, he's actually kind of loving he's a dick because he's a guy in that time period, but he's not as much of a dick as he is on the show.
I think you're absolutely right that the book as it was written wouldn't have had the same impact on the screen. I mean, like the additional storylines that they added, I mean, they're related. It's like they're cousins, right? And I think I like the series and I like the books. They're clearly not the same. The addition of Marina Thompson, I was really intrigued because that is a character who figures in the 5th book tangentially, but we never met. She was, spoiler alert, she was dead before the book started. And now she's like a character on her own. And so I'm wondering, are they going to come back to this if they keep going in other seasons before we get to what would be 5/season 5 and Eloise?
Or do we just completely, maybe we just deviate, which is fine too, because there are things. I mean, I would imagine the story, given that what we know Penelope is Whistledown, right? That changes your perception of books 2, 3, and 4 entirely. Yes, obviously, like Nicole, you knew going in because you'd already read them before you started watching the show. But now everyone will know for season 2. So it changes your perception. It changes your perception of the book. And I don't know if that's bad. That's fine.
I guess I would like to see Penelope take some sort of culpability for like what she's done. I mean, it works. Quote, it works out for Marina in the best way that it can, given the way they wrote it. Because the regency was cruel, and the show is quite cruel at times, which is again in keeping with a lot of 18th and 19th century literature. And I won't say how it ends, but the 4th book does focus on Penelope and Colin Bridgerton and their relationship, and there is no Marina in that scenario. But given the changes in the 1st season, I'm very curious about how the writers would get us TV viewers on board with the relationship in a way that makes sense, given what Penelope did and how she hurt both of them with her actions. And like how like Colin will react when he finds out about Whistledown in a way that has to be different from novel. Like there's no way the way the book plays out is how it's going to play out on the TV show. And you might, sorry, Nicole, go ahead.
No, you're absolutely correct that what they did now, if they keep going, has really complicated Colin and Penelope's story. I kind of hope it keeps going because I really want to see what they do. I have to admit, I'm also curious. In book 2, it is mentioned explicitly that Penelope has lost weight.
Yes.
When she first came out, she was too heavy and people made fun of her. It specifically mentioned she's lost weight. got to admit, I'm curious as to what they're going to do, if they're going to address that or if they're just going to go, nope, she can look however she wants to look. Colin will still fall for her.
Mm-hmm. So you're wondering if they're just going to make the actress lose weight?
Yes.
Or if they're, yeah. I mean, they might. Who knows? Or they could just. I mean, or they could just. It could just not come up, right? Because
exactly.
No one's race ever comes up in. I mean, the novels don't explicitly. I mean, the entire thing about the fact that Simon is black is not a thing in the novels. But technically, I don't know that he's not. I mean, it doesn't say he's not. It just say Simon, a white guy. It just never mentions his race.
So they could just skip it. They could just skip it completely. And
right.
I mean, I would be fine with that. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if because it's Shonda and they're trying to be more, I guess, inclusive, and I'm hoping that includes body positivity, that she's not expected to lose weight.
Mm-hmm.
I actually just got done reading another romance novel that grapples with the long history of fat phobia in romance. And I mean, we all have watched the makeover scenes in like Princess Diaries, which Shonda Rhimes actually wrote for Princess Diaries too. Like Princess Diaries has a makeover scene, which is basically like we will give Anne Hathaway curly hair and then we will make it straight, which was real good for my self-esteem as a kid.
She also had braces, didn't she? Didn't she also have braces at one point? I don't remember.
Glasses.
Yeah.
No, it was really good for myself.
She just like a fairly normal bookish teenager. She wasn't even unattractive. It was like, which is always why those like the weird like makeover montages. She went from a normal looking human being to a supermodel, I guess. I don't know.
I'm just gonna recommend for the listener. I've got to recommend for the listener, not another teen movie where they agonize over what the makeover should be, and then they're finally like, "What if we just take out your ponytail and take off your glasses? Oh my God, you're amazing!" It's an explicit thing.
Not though. Well, and I do think like actually like in some ways not addressing the weight thing would be seems like it would be more in keeping at least with the themes of the television show. I think because because of the racial aspect mentioned, and I think also like I would almost even if I would find it the weight being a non-event despite the non-eventness like more interesting just because especially we don't see that in period costume pieces all that often. And like even when there are characters that aren't I won't even say like overweight, like that aren't like very quite thin. In Regency dramas, they're always cast as like somehow like they're never like main characters. They're almost always like people who are working in service, or they're somehow people who are like they are the butt of the joke because people don't like them because they don't fit this very narrow idea of beauty, which like Bridgerton does do. I mean, Penelope's shown being ostracized because of her weight, but she's still given but she's still an actual character. Especially, I mean, I think that's part of why making her Miss Whistledown is interesting.
Right. Well, the novel does make a definite point of saying that Daphne is not particularly attractive. It does the thing where it's like she she's not ugly, but she's rather plain, and boys mostly don't notice her because they think. I mean, it does. It does. This is a move that one makes in a modern romance novel quite frequently, which is you don't want the heroine to be stunningly beautiful because you want her to be accessible, so that the presumed female reader can place herself in that place and say, oh, she's just like me. And Bridgerton, the novel, or The Duke and I is the first novel, it does make that point about Daphne. And that's not mentioned in the TV show at all because Phoebe DeVayner is stunningly gorgeous. So they don't try to like make her plain. She's just pretty and everybody likes her. And it doesn't make a big deal of it one way or the other. So they've put a little bit of the fat shaming in just to let you know that it is part of Penelope's character. And I think they'll just like leave it at that. It would be my guess.
I guess we can transition now since we're talking about some of the changes to the adaptation. Most controversial scene in Bridgerton, I think it's fair to say, both in The Duke and I and the television series, is a scene of rape between Daphne and Simon, and there are changes between the book and the television show.
So how does that play out in the book?
Well, first of all, he threatens to rape her.
Well, yeah, actually, I'm kind of curious though. Before we even get into how it's different, because this was again what Nicole and I were discussing offline, which is why I invited her. Did other people find it rapey?
Yeah, it's a non-consensual sexual activity. Ergo,
okay.
He's saying,
Well,
wait,
no,
wait,
don't,
wait.
don't talk about the book yet. Yeah, don't talk about the book yet. I mean, just from because Katya's only seen the show, and you definitely found it rapey, right? Sarah, you've only seen the show.
Yeah, and I thought it was a little rapey. Okay,
all right. That's what I wondered too. Because at the time that I saw it, I'd only seen the show, and it was like, I don't. And my impression when I saw it was, I don't think that played out the way they probably wanted it to, because it was uncomfortable, and I read it as, I don't think that's supposed to be rapey, but it felt kind of rapey. That's how
that was my reaction. As I was like, this, not having read the books, I was like, okay, this seems it felt a little like out of character for the show. And part of that is because I think, okay, part of it is just because I have a general thing about representations of sexual violence in TV shows anyway, which is a different episode, but like, it just didn't feel like it fit with the storyline of the TV show.
Right. We should let the listeners know what happened. And because Hannah, Nicole had definitely read the books first. Hannah, had you read that book yet or no?
Oh, I only read the books after we did that. So in the show, basically what happens is that Daphne figures out that Simon has been lying to her about his ability to have children, and which, like, I feel like we should get into in a minute about sexuality and Bridgerton, but that's a different topic, though related. And so as they're having sex, he is on top, and then she flips them over, and he feels himself about to ejaculate, and he says, I'm making this sound extremely clinical, I guess. I don't know. I'm very bad at describing things. And he's like, looks panicked underneath her and says, wait. And she keeps going. And
she's figured out that he needs to ejaculate inside her because he's previously been pulling out as birth control.
Right. We'll talk in a little bit about the weirdness of Daphne's ability and inability to understand how reproduction works in the book and the TV show, which is a little different actually. But like, so that's a weirdness in and of itself. But she basically, I mean, I'll be less clinical than Hannah. She forces him to come inside of her because she's trying to get pregnant, and she knows that he doesn't want to.
Yeah, and I
also, rapey.
Yes,
like by definition.
Yeah. Yes. I also want to say that there has been an interview with the showrunner, and asked him about this and said, readers view this as a rape scene. So why do you feel it necessary to adapt the scene in this way? And he said, quote, we are a show that allows our female characters to be complicated and to be far from perfect. They often have to make complicated choices. In the writer's room, we discussed that scene at length. Felt that the female characters on the show, Daphne especially, should be allowed to do just that. She should be flawed. She should be able to make questionable choices. We felt a responsibility to the story of the education of Daphne Bridgerton, and that scene is very much a part of her story. I think part of the scene's design was to raise conversation. The conversation that the scene is brought up around consent is an important one to be having. It's one that we encourage audiences to engage in. The show can only present our commentary, and we can only present our critique. That's what the show does and what the scene is really about. As storytellers, we can't pass judgment on the decisions Daphne makes, but it was important to us to understand why she's making those decisions. I think the why is pretty clear.
About that.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate the aspect about the conversation. I do agree with that. I think especially like having a TV show this popular that addresses is candidly addressing the fact that men can also be victims of rape, which was not something we see as frequently. And I think also I will say that I think Bridgerton at least seems like it gestures towards taking actually addressing rape as an issue rather than as a convenient dramatic device. I do have an issue, however, with the idea that this fits with the storyline. And I think part of that is because Bridgerton has a tendency to collapse time periods or the extent of time that passes between particular events. It seems like basically in the course of a very short period of time, Daphne goes from being extremely naive about the world to dominant woman also raping her husband. Basically, she does a complete 180 in what seems like a matter of days.
Okay. I'm interested there because I agree with you. In my internal time period of just watching the show, and this does match up with the books, I read it as being maybe a week or two after they got married. Even
then, though, if you take from her realizing basically that he's lying to rape, even just the fact that is a 180 over the course of weeks. Sure. It's she is previously depicted as being like a relatively submissive person and like very concerned about propriety and very concerned about like her behavior towards other people. And like, I guess the argument could be like she just like snaps, but like I don't see that either.
Okay.
Like also at the beginning of the series, she is very concerned about consent when it comes to her choices.
Yes.
And her own experiences with Nigel Burbrook, and it seems like consent, like she understands consent in two different ways when it comes to her than when it comes to her husband. And there's there have been some really good analyses of scene, and just it doesn't seem to like show like talks about like we offer our commentary, but like does it? Because I think I think the analyses like say this show like makes him beg for her forgiveness and puts him in the wrong are correct.
I am curious about like Sarah's point of view as somebody who hasn't seen it, and then Nicole's, because Nicole's the only person who had read it first, so that's why I want to save hers for last. Because I don't want to get clouded.
I will say that, like, I agree that it seemed very out of character, but I kind of read it as like she is very concerned with propriety and in society and all of the mores that are correct for the time. And yet I think she was so like the most important more of that time is for her to get pregnant. And so I feel like to me, I kind of read it as she was like, well, I don't effing care. I need a baby because that is the only thing that makes me whole.
That's where I was, because again, and I feel a little differently about it now that I've read the version, and I'm trying to still separate book Daphne from TV Daphne in my head. But because watching it, and it did seem weird to me when it first happened, and then I had 4 more episodes to get through, and I oddly became more comfortable with it because, like I said before, I think everyone on the show is sort of problematically flawed in frankly pretty big ways. And that changed. I mean, so I agree with everything Katya said, and that made me okay with it because for me at that moment, Daphne became a liar. Like Daphne's everything up and I didn't feel as though the show excused it for me. For me at that moment, Daphne went from being good girl to, oh, you're just kind of as much of a dick as everybody else in this world, doing whatever it takes to get where you feel you need to be, including raping somebody that you profess to love. And
I think one of the things I'm thinking this through more as we're talking about it is I think like when I was going back and kind of like preparing notes for the show, I realized like how much this show is slut shamey towards Simon.
Yes.
Like, cause she repeatedly jokes in like the early episodes, like referring to him as a rake, which is basically like, regency slightly, I mean, not quite. I don't know if it's quite the same as calling someone like a male whore. It's like has a little bit more.
It's exactly that, isn't it?
Like a fuckboy.
Yeah, I would say it's more like fuckboy than like whore, because I think that there's more of a like acceptance. Like Simon is not shunned from society for being a rake. Sure.
He's
like,
also
I guess
super rich. Yes. Right. I get what you're saying.
Right. I guess that's why I'm making the distinction. But like she does like basically slut shame him, and I think that there is a logic of like, because you've had sex with lots of women before, like what I'm doing is fine.
Mm-hmm. Oh, like, whoa, really? Because that's not how I read it. I mean, that's interesting.
I can see that. I don't know if that's necessarily the best reading, but that's a reading I could see, because I don't know that she like. I could totally see like if you put it in the context of like the historical period that's trying to represent is sort of like, okay, they're like, I mean, because obviously this is alternate history such that it is. This is obviously the time where like rape and marriage does not like that's not considered a thing.
Sure.
So like I appreciate the reading that like she's trying to attain what's expected of her, albeit in a way that we don't expect.
Okay.
But I think a lot of it is also like, I don't know that she like, I think I can't remember if it was Hannah or someone else, but like, I don't think she respects consent when it comes to men, specifically Simon, because he has that reputation.
See, like, I read it slightly differently.
Because like, I think because when she's obsessed with consent in the beginning, it's specifically like her consent, but I think also feminine consent in general, because there's this expectation of purity politics. The men don't have the same expectation of purity. Ergo, I could see an argument where basically she doesn't think of consent as being an issue that applies to men.
Can I ask a question, Katya? Let me ask Katya a question. Do you think that Daphne thought she was wrong? Because the way I read it was she does, and again, it's weird. I thought she knew she was doing the wrong thing the entire time. And,
I did not.
And then she was like, "Fuck it, this is what I'm doing anyway." So I read it as more premeditated in the TV show. Like she is like, "Oh, well, he trapped me." But I need a baby and he lied to me. So this is what I'm going to do. And to hell with the consequences.
So I agree with that reading, but I don't think that she thought that she was in the wrong. Like, I think and it may be because it's in like an eye for an eye situation.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think because she's convinced that having a child is the appropriate thing, because she goes, the only reason she's initially okay with not having children is because she believes that Simon is physically incapable. That's like respectable. Mm-hmm. Refusing to have children, however, goes against like the entire society she's built her life around. And she talks about having issues with that at a few points in the series, because like being a wife and mother is the only thing expected of her. But he thinks what she's doing is wrong. Okay. I don't know if she necessarily thinks it's good, but I think she thinks it's like the correct, like, I guess I'm trying to draw a distinction between like what she thinks is morally good or bad and what she thinks is correct. Like, I think what my at least initial response to that is I think she believes what she's doing is correct. I don't know necessarily. I don't know that she feels icky about it, because
I think she does.
I don't think she feels icky about it.
Why is the one that but then she goes in and guilts Simon for it.
Yeah, I don't think she feels icky.
Okay.
And the TV show sides with her.
Yes, that I agree. I agree, which bothers me.
Means it does not critique it, which means that when everyone, like when the people like were citing and like in our own cars, it means that it might be set in the Regency period where consent was an issue. Love and Excess, Pamela, like Evelina, Emma, like there's always like threat of rape are in those books in one way or another. And that is carried on to romance novels today. Still, are another example, Wonder Woman. We won't get into that, different show. But like non-consensual sex is everywhere in our media, and the show like doesn't critique it, and the showrunner refuses to critique it in a way as well in his answer. And so,
which feels like she gets a pass because she's a woman.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I think part of the whole problem is that issue of having children or not is basically half the book.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of those things where sometimes you see something and you're like, why is that there? Because it was in the book.
It's the plot of the book and it's a subplot on the show.
Yeah. So I think this was what they did to cause the marital tension that then has to be resolved. And I don't know that they had to keep it. I mean, I appreciate the article you quoted, and I can see that they're saying, okay, we're gonna go ahead with this problematic scene, but at the same time, they made it worse than it was in the book.
Yes, by far.
Okay. I had read the book multiple times
because, like,
and I had never once thought to myself, wow, that scene is rapey. I had thought it was inappropriate. I mean, I thought she was wrong, but never in my head did I think, wow, rapey. And, a friend of mine even wrote to me and said, I heard there's a rape scene in Bridgerton. I'm not sure if I should watch it because I'm afraid of getting triggered. And I wrote her back and I said, well, it's probably not what you're thinking it is. I don't want to spoil it for you, but okay. And so she watched the show and then she's like, yeah, that wasn't what I thought at all. Okay. Yeah. So in the book, for those of you who haven't read it.
Before you describe it, because I do want you to give the plot, because so I had the weird opposite feeling. I'm wondering about this from Hannah too, because I watched the show first, right? So then I'm going back and reading the book and I know it's coming. And then it's just like, well, that's different. And again, I'm not, because once Nicole explains it, I'm still not okay with it, but it's very different.
mean,
And I was wondering if Hannah, did you feel that way too? Like going the opposite
I mean,
direction?
it is different, because of the context. But I'm not sure like how the TV show influenced me, but it felt like rape. And in fact, in some ways, like it emphasizes like certain circumstances that have changed that, well, I guess I'll let Nicole explain.
Let Nicole do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And let me say, I can absolutely see how people who had just read the book would look at it as rapey. I'm just saying that me personally, I had not applied that term to it. I did think it was wrong, but I just hadn't used that terminology. Mm-hmm. So in the book, Daphne doesn't have to go to her maid. Daphne and Simon have just had sex, and she's finally figured out that him pulling out is the reason that she's not going to get pregnant. And they have the big fight about, saying you can't have children is not the same thing as saying you won't have children. And, basically Daphne then moves into a different bedroom, and Simon gets mad, and she's like, hey, you're going to withhold a child? I'm going to withhold sex. Just go away. I'm still really upset. Simon goes off and gets drunk, comes home. He's banging on her door. He's drunk. He's worried she's going to leave him. She says, you need to go to bed. He winds up falling asleep in her bed. And he's like, no, you have to stay. Don't leave me. And so they wind up.
She does let him in. He doesn't, because she's worried about him because he's falling over. He's like, he's shit faced.
She pounds on the door, not breaks it down. But
Sure.
So in the morning, she wakes up. He's still there. He's asleep. Basically, she's like, oh, morning erection. Oh, and it's more sort of an opportunity thing that they are sort of sleepily making love. And then she realizes, if I get on top, I can control this. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards, basically, he's then fully awake and he is devastated. His stammer comes back, so he's embarrassed, and he leaves. And it's not the whole I'm not letting you out of my sight thing. It's he goes off to a different property, and basically then they're living apart for almost 2 months because he doesn't even want to be around her. Right?
See,
so
narratively, that makes so much more sense to me.
Yeah, there's a consequence.
In the show, because I watched it again last night. When he comes in and he finds her in the room and says, are you ready for bed? And she's sitting there staring at that picture of his mother, and she's contemplative. It really was much more, to me, premeditated.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's entirely premeditated.
I have a question about the book. So, because in the TV show, basically, he's basically saying no. Does that happen in the book?
No.
He's intoxicated.
And he kind of realizes at the last minute that kind of suddenly realizes what's going to happen, and he does sort of say we'll wait, and but she I believe the line is she bears down.
I paid very close attention because I knew we were going to have this conversation. So the book is better at this conversation because the book opens up a question of and we have this question a lot in media about women's rights, not so often about men's, but the book opens up much more a question of when is it okay to say no? And it comes across very much in the book to me as though, okay, they were fighting, but she was worried, so she let him sleep in the bed. She starts playing with him and making out with him. He does fully wake up. It's not like she just fucks him while he's asleep. He wakes up, he's into it. And
more now, I need you now.
Yes.
She gets on top and he's like, I want to watch you.
But he's hungover and it's early in the morning. And how capable of consent is he? Probably
the reason this makes more sense to me is I think that the scene you've just described, and again, I haven't read the book, but like the scene you just described to me makes much more sense with Daphne's character, what we know about Daphne's character, even though like it's not any less rapey really, but it is more understandable because up until that point, like Daphne she definitely is manipulative in some sense, like the whole entire like orchestrated like lie thing that she has, like she is manipulative. She does lie. Like we know that. But I think like the immediate escalation, I feel like that happens on the show, it like feels odd that scene feels so much to me because that's much more about like taking advantage of a situation that's already happening than the premeditated, which is what she does even with the entire like orchestrated lie with Simon. Is she takes advantage of situations. She doesn't seem like somebody who outside of the rape scene is like what's like proactively like evil. I don't know, like proactively manipulative in that way. So that just makes
the book gives her gray. The book gives her moral ambiguity that the TV show doesn't, and that's kind of, it's weird because so he doesn't say no so much as, again, in the book's very much in her. It's not first person, but it's very much from her point of view. So she is aware that if he were thinking straight, he would pull out. And she's like, oh, this is my chance while he's not thinking straight and he's about to orgasm and doesn't know what he's going to do. I'm going to get pregnant right here. Like, so she knows she's being manipulative, but it's a spur of the moment thing that makes her, it gives her moral questionability, but it doesn't feel. And in fact, you even do get a short scene with him where he's kind of, how could she do this to me? Or, well, to be fair, I mean, I was saying yes, yes, yes. You know, like he talks to
also
himself.
The consequences make sense.
Right. Yes.
Because the consequences and the reaction in the show don't and again, is that like how much time has passed kind of thing. They don't really make sense based off of what's going on.
In the book, part of what complicates it is that right after he's, like I said, he's horrified and his stutter comes back and he's having trouble speaking. And she has also the past few days found out that he had a stutter because she didn't know. She didn't know about that either. And so she's sort of looking at him and he feels, he's feeling like, I don't pity me, think badly of him. And so it's sort of all one big complicated mess. I just think she comes off more conniving and calculating in the show. And in the book, it's like Mav said, she sees an opportunity and she takes it and it's bad and she feels guilty about it later. But I don't know. She doesn't seem as mean about it.
Well, yeah, it doesn't seem as, it sounds like it just doesn't seem as like intentionally trying to hurt people.
Right.
As it kind of comes across in the show, because the show, it like genuinely seems like at that point she's decided she gives like zero fucks about Simon.
I mean, like
as
even
a human being.
The framing of that scene with the music and the lighting, just like it sets it up for you to have a very specific reading of that scene. Although I will say the book also just has, for me, the scene was just as upsetting to read, but for different reasons.
Well, because they try to make it very sexy. It is very much written like a porn scene.
Just like like the fact that he was intoxicated, the fact that been following the tradition of I multiple Amazon reviewers were like, and I was particularly upset when I discovered that Simon like threatens to rape her when they're having their fight, and it's it's rough. Yes, it's when anyone says I don't want to watch Bridgerton or read romance novels because of like their problems with consent. You can't really argue with that. It's also like a thing that, as I said, has been embedded in the genre and talked about before on different episodes of the show as well. And it's just it honestly, like with Bridgerton and Wonder Woman coming out on the same day and having the same problem, not to mention all the other shows, it's like, have we moved forward at all on this issue? Especially when it's like, and this is my issue with rape scenes in a lot of shows too. It's like, I don't know that in the TV show, I don't know that scene was necessary to tell the story that they were telling. Like, I think you still could have had the same conflict and end with them getting pregnant and blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't think it was necessary to build the drama. I don't think it was necessary to tell that story. Like, I get that it's in the book and there's, reasons to replicate it. But I think that's part of what's disappointing about the show, because about that scene in the show, especially because up until that point, it's a fairly even though it's dramatic and there's dark moments, it's still a show that I would call relatively escapist, because it's this alternate history and the fashion, and that episode kind of kills it.
So I want to ask a question then before we transition to other issues about Bridgerton, just to sort of cap this off. I know Hannah and Katya have both seen Wonder Woman. Sarah and Nicole, have you guys? Because you
No.
okay. Well, you mentioned them both coming out at the same time, Katya, and then have we really transitioned? And I'm like, the one thing that I am wondering if we've transitioned is, or we've improved, or however you want to say it is. Yes, I think we have, because what's interesting about the two of them is that both Wonder Woman and Bridgerton, yes, they both have a questionably necessary rape scene, but both of them are rape scenes of women raping men, which I don't think that happens. I mean, at least we're having this conversation. It doesn't happen enough.
It's happened a lot of times. Like Once Upon a Time, like Fringe actually has.
Okay, Fringe, yes,
it has like some dubious consent in the same way that Wonder Woman does in the terms of whole body things. Like I those are like just the two examples that popped in my head. But that's
well, not as often as women's consent being violated.
No, I think that's fair.
No.
I think it's also important to be able to tell stories that talk about consent without automatically going to rape. Because of the triggering issue. You're basically making a TV show that otherwise a lot of people would probably really enjoy. I mean, and basically excluding them from that. This is my problem also with Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones,
you're basically saying that people who have experienced sexual violence, because this is not a safe show for them to watch, are not going to watch it. And I'm not saying that art needs to be safe for everybody. I get when you're you are making that choice as a person who's making that. And I think especially when it's a very popular TV show, I take issue with it, because it's like, okay, you're taking something like Game of Thrones is probably the better example, because it's like that was a multi-year phenomenon where if you weren't watching Game of Thrones, people kind of thought you were weird, even though I can totally understand why, if you are someone who is triggered by sexual violence, you would not want to watch that show. I'm one of those people. I'm I don't want to watch a show and support a show that thinks that this is okay.
Game of Thrones, what is so upsetting about Game of Thrones is, one, did not have to have as much rape as they did, because while questions of consent and rape are a part of the storylines in the books, they turned consensual scenes into rape scenes. Also, they took characters that are that can be read as explicitly anti-rape and who have been traumatized by sexual violence, and they made them rapists. And I'm just, anyway, but you can tell stories about consent like Katya was talking about without being explicitly like Game of Thrones. And I want to kick it back to one of our older episodes where we talked about The Favorite, which is another, we talked about royal TV and movies, and we talked about The Favorite, and it's so different because it actually talks about consent and addresses the rapiness of the 18th century explicitly without doing without glamorizing it or even just explicitly showing something like Outlander, for example.
And Bridgerton itself does it.
Yeah.
In the early episodes, those episodes are all around questions of consent that have nothing that around marriage, around relationships, and there's no rape.
I mean, even
it's doable.
And 18th century novels do that. To some degree, depending on what novel you read.
I was just going to say, I think there's this really interesting thing that's starting to happen where, you were talking about how far have we come regarding rape in media. And I think what I'm starting to notice is that rape is still happening, but it's now becoming a character development for oh, now this person has agency. I feel like you saw that in Game of Thrones with Daenerys. She was being raped, she was being treated like cattle, and then when she got her dragons and came into her own, everybody stopped fucking with her.
Same thing with Sansa.
But with Sansa in particular, that was her saying I'm glad this happened, and it was some really just mishandling of that storyline.
Yeah. And I feel like with Bridgerton, it's kind of similar. That's kind of what we were seeing with Daphne. She's this tiny submissive person and, it seemed out of character, but it was sort of all of a sudden she figured out how babies, where babies come from. And then she was like, fuck, I'm going to take a charge of this and I'm going to do it. And it is sort of you were supposed to be yeah, girl, she came into her own, and it's problematic. But I feel like that's the weird trend that we're seeing with how rape is now being depicted as almost
empowering somehow.
An empowering thing. Yeah.
I think the fact that it's the rapist that's the person being empowered makes it to me even more upsetting.
Oh, it's very gross. I'm just noticing it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think I sort of wonder, they changed so many other things. Why
not change that?
They have figured out a way to to do that differently, to have the conversation and the conflict, but not do that. I mean, again, I wonder, okay, we wanted to address it. Well, but yeah, okay,
well,
you didn't do it.
You know what? Honestly, if they were going to, the changes they made to it made it worse. Because I think that if I'd read the book first, like Nicole had, I would have been a little more forgiving of it. In that, like I have a problem with it in the book, but it really is the premeditation. The fact that she had all day to sit here and figure out how she was going to rape him makes it worse than like in the book. It is very explicit that he's mad, and that she knows he's not thinking straight, but that he didn't technically stop her, right? Like he even says that, if I weren't so turned on, and which is again problematic in an entirely different kind of way. But it just, I think that you can have that. Yeah, it was bad in a different way that makes it, I think, more of a conversation and a less of a wow, she just became a villain, which is what. Yeah,
bad in the book, and then they just made it worse.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I do want to, Sarah just mentioned, because I want to make sure we get to this before we run out of time, the fact that because it's lighter, but one of my biggest problems with the show, and this is less of a deal in the book, oddly, but still kind of a problem, is that Daphne doesn't know where babies come from. And in the book, it almost makes more sense because there's not as much devotion to their sexual lives before they get married as there is in the show. But Daphne knows a whole lot about sex to not know where babies come from. Which is odd. It's the line that makes it very weird for me is like, it's weird enough that like her mom just can't tell her, but okay, I'll let that go, suspension of disbelief. But when she doesn't know about sex until he tells her about masturbation. She doesn't know what sex is before her mom talks to her the day before her wedding. And then she's like, well, he can't have nothing. Yeah. But she's like, she knows, she seems to like not even know that sex is a thing, that she knows that married people sleep in the same bed sometimes, but like beyond that knows nothing. And then all of a sudden she's like, well, I assumed he couldn't have sex because he said he couldn't have babies. And I'm like, what did you think? It becomes weird because I'm like, what did you think sex even was? Like, it was weird. It was just because I've since watched those couple scenes again to see if I was just missing something. Oh. And no, it's just weird. It's just weird that she knows that if she was completely clueless, which she actually kind of is in the book, then I'm fine with it. But like, I'm like, well, what exactly were the mechanics you're imagining is a question I have. Because
she's like the oldest. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was going to say they make such a point of that, though, with like the sister, where the sister like busts in and she's like, someone tell me where babies come from. And the brothers are all like making really inappropriate farm animal jokes and talking about brothels. And then the mom like yells at them all. And it's like, so they're setting you up for this idea that like women have like literally no idea.
Right.
Which is a convention of romance novels, of historical romance novels, that women just knew nothing until they were getting married.
But you would think then their mom would explain it.
Wait, which is exactly what professors who literally say 18th century sexuality have critiqued about the show, that like you think like it is unreasonable that they would not know by the time they got married. And like there are definitely 18th century novels like Evelina where like women are very naive and get put into positions because of their naivete that like,
I mean, there's a difference between naivete and not understanding basic facts about your own biology. Especially because like the two women we see not getting shit are like the two oldest daughters in a family full of many children. Like the idea that they would be like, okay, they don't get the mechanics of sex. There's like vagaries that they don't fully grasp, but the idea that they have literally no idea, like at one point, the younger, I forget her name off the top of my head. Eloise talks about like basically pregnancy being contagious.
Right.
Like,
oh God,
as if she's not aware that a man is involved.
Right. That's not in the book, by the way. Yeah. Clearly Daphne knows that babies come out of vaginas because she's seen 4 other ones born, right? Like she's seen her younger siblings, but she's clearly old enough. Well, maybe not Eloise, but she's old enough over her youngest siblings that she remembers her mom getting fat and then a baby happening, right? Like she can't not know that.
And it would have happened in the house, so she would have heard the screaming.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, I to address the confusion about sexuality, Penelope, who I guess we can write off as saying, oh, she's Lady Whistledown, she's duplicitous, but Penelope is like, she's being super stupid.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But then like Whistledown will put out notices that say things like, congratulations in stamina. It's like, Penelope, how do you know to write about stamina if you're clueless?
I have to believe Penelope's lying. I have to believe that Penelope is
lying.
Mimicking Eloise ignorant too, because Whistledown just knows stuff about sex that Penelope professes to not know. So I haven't been able to figure out exactly what she knows, and because it like Whistledown's column makes no sense about like all the stuff about, well, you know, they suddenly went to the country, you know, and then were abroad, but they came back with a baby. Whistledown says stuff like that all the time, which is clearly Whistledown hinting at the fact that she was pregnant before they got married. But then Penelope seems to not know that. But is she just lying for Eloise's benefit? I don't know.
But
Dumb question. Is it possible that just like within the Bridgerton universe, that somehow it's just the Bridgerton girls that are this bloody sheltered?
not if you believe
Like-
Penelope. And also, like, I mean, to be honest,
No, but if it's considered a conversation that you wouldn't like, Penelope's trying to like hide her identity as Mrs. Whistledown, though, and like if this is a taboo topic, I could imagine like women not necessarily having this conversation outside of their families. So like if the Bridgerton, like if the mom isn't telling them about this stuff, like,
Oh, you think Penelope's like, oh, well, shit, I'm not doing this. Yeah, I'll be dumb too. Cause yeah. Okay. Maybe.
I mean, like,
because like if they're being judged basically for like being alone in a room with a man. So like I could totally see like if Penelope shares with another family, it becomes gossip, even if she trusts Eloise. Like, I don't know. Because I guess just a thought of like, could it just be the Bridgerton girls? Or just completely clueless? Because even Simon's a little surprised.
I mean, if you're in society, like take like something like Evelina. You want to be innocent. You don't want to be alone in a room with a man, even if like dude is like proposing to you when it's like appropriate. If you think about Prime Prayers and everyone getting up for Mr. Collins to make his little speech, that's like the catch-22 of being like a woman in like the 18th, 19th century. It's like you have to be pure at all times, but also sometimes you have to cross the line to like have your relationship go forward so you can do the things you're supposed to do. And it's like it's this strange like in between, because women can never win, as the show kind of addresses in the first couple of episodes. Like the sexuality is on this show. Yeah. Go ahead.
So I found it interesting that they made Nigel more of a villain in the TV series.
So, as opposed to just an idiot.
Yeah, he's just sort of, well, anyway, that's off topic.
No, it's not. It's just, and that's kind of what I was saying about the series. The series, one of the things that I think is interesting about it is, I mean, you talked about Anthony being the worst, and Anthony is the worst. But I think that, but for the youngest two Bridgerton children, whose names escape me at this moment.
Cynthia Gregory.
Thank you. Everybody else on the TV show, I have some reason to hate, from Daphne to and again, I'm not like no one is absolutely pure. Even Eloise, who is, who's sort of presented as, no, I'm going to be a feminist. I'm going to have my own life. I'm going to have my own thing. She's got a mean streak to her in the show that she's barely in the book. So I don't know what happens in the later books. So she doesn't have that in the first book. And Daphne is, she's got conniving parts in the rapist bit. Simon's not the greatest person. Anthony's an asshole. Colin, Colin betrays people. Like there's lots of reasons to not like everybody. And I think that the show tries to make the point of everyone has good points and bad points, and the bad points can be really bad, even if society doesn't show them. And I think that's what they're trying to say. They're a perfect family, but they all have secrets.
Nigel is just, they literally, like, Chris Van Dusen literally calls him an incel.
There's no redeeming qualities there.
Right, but but in the book, he's just a blubbering idiot. He's just, in the book, I think he's really in love with her, just an idiot. He's only in like one real scene in the book.
I hope that they created a certain character to marry another character who is a minor character, because no one deserves to be married to Nigel in the series. thinking about like how precarious, like what's strange to me about like loving the 18th century, 19th century as a romance genre is like, world is precarious. You might not marry someone you love if you want a chance to get married. You might marry a bad man. And being married is terrible if you're married to a bad man. Like look at the Tin of Wildfell Hall, for example. And so and Penelope is like, you shouldn't entrap Colin. He's a good man. And Marina's like, well, what choice do I have? Should I perhaps entrap a bad man? And it's like, no, you don't want to entrap a bad man because there is no escape for you. Well, I mean, sort of technically maybe a little bit, but like,
murder.
Daphne's not. Even run away.
She knows how to entrap a man. So like it's back to what do some people know and what do other people know?
Marina's black though.
Because Marina's been deflowered already, that she now knows how to entrap a man, but at the same time, just being alone in a room with them is enough to entrap it.
Yeah.
She's also, I was going to say, she does seem, because we haven't talked much about the race stuff and we're running out of time, but Marina is more knowledgeable than all the Featheringtons and Bridgertons alike. Yeah. She just seems to know more just in general, presumably because she's had sex and that makes people smarter. I don't know.
She's also experienced different class circumstances. Like I think the show suggests that part of the reason she's more worldly is because she hasn't always been wealthy and in society. But
it also, as Nicole pointed out before, she's one of the black characters, which the show tries a little bit to try and, have its cake and eat it too with race. Like it tries to be progressive by casting black characters and in this alternate universe history where, racism has been quashed. And then it both tries to deal with race issues and then it tries to just kind of hand wash over them and say it's really about class, except for all the lower class characters that have real speaking parts are black. Like there's some maids, but they don't really matter. Right. You've got the boxer, you've got the seamstress, you've got Marina. Like, yes, Marina technically is noble, I guess. The queen's noble.
She has a dowry, but it's different. Like, and Marina's story really reflect. Like, I felt I was watching a bit of like the story of Dido Elizabeth Bell, who was a British heiress who was black. And there's a movie that's made about her called Belle that I would say it's fair to say it romanticizes her life with her white family. But in reality, and I can put a link for those who want to hear more about her story. She was treated pretty poorly. Like she was not equal with like the white members of her family. So like to be an heiress and to be black was far different an experience to be an heiress and to be white in the 18th and 19th centuries. And there's a novel called The Woman of Color that was published in 1808, and it is not a Jane Austen novel. It focuses on its main character Olivia, who is an heiress and a woman of color, and how she experiences racism in England. And it's actually like an amazing novel. Broadview has a really great edition. You should all read it, but that's not what this is about.
So Hannah, is there anything on your list that we didn't discuss that you really want to like bring up?
Yeah, I do want to, and I guess we can transition by talking about the Queen. I want to talk about the addition of Queen Charlotte.
And make it its own episode specifically on like casting a historically accurate like racial representation.
Queen Charlotte, like many historians do believe that Queen Charlotte did have African ancestry. If you read some of the descriptions of Queen Charlotte, like people used racism to insult her. So like Bridgerton is taking it like she was seen as a woman who was of mixed race, who was passing perhaps in like reality, but like Bridgerton, of course, reimagines her as I think one person put it, a black queen reigning as a black queen. And that is different, certainly, but it's not just a choice that they made with no historical basis whatsoever.
There's a pretty famous portrait of her that if you look at it, she has features that would lead you to believe that historians sort of use that as part of the evidence of, see, she looks mixed race.
Mhm.
Maybe we just need to do a part 2 on Bridgerton.
Yeah, because I feel like this could be like another half an hour to really talk about it in depth.
Well, but I'll tell you, I'm wondering if in season 2, if they're going to have Anthony, they're going to have his partner also be black.
I mean, it does. The entire thing does create like a very interesting circumstance that, like, I wonder if part of me wonders if they'd done more explicitly with it other than just sort of, there's this one offhanded, oh, and by the way, King George married a black woman, so racism doesn't exist anymore. Okay, so moving on. That's kind of how much explanation the show gives it.
Simon then says is BS, and that the king could change his mind on a whim, and also points out that King George, quote, a mind, as we all know, is hanging by one loose and tenuous thread, and so he said love changes nothing. And actually, like I think some other people have alluded to this, but we all know that like this is kind of like a BS explanation, because if we just look at Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's relationship and how the British press have treated them.
Right. But that's what the show gives you. And then it does nothing with it, really. It's
interesting. Like, I wonder if, like, because I think, Mav, I think it was you that noted that, like, this season was more about, like, I mean, obviously the romance and all the consent issues we talked about, but also, like, more of an emphasis on class than race. I'm wondering if they're going to do more with the racial aspect in future seasons. I hope that they do, because I think it's, like, that like, scene with Simon, I think was one of the most interesting of the series, and it just goes nowhere.
Right.
There's one place it goes.
Okay.
Like 10 seconds. For 10 seconds. There's a scene with Queen Charlotte where King George becomes lucid for a day. For a moment. And you see firsthand how he slowly regresses, and that like shows you just how Simon actually is right, no matter how like much of the like TV show argues that love conquers all, and yes, like that is what it's supposed to do. But that scene goes against the grain that the Queen's position is actually more precarious than we might have assumed, given how she wields her power over others. And I thought that was actually one of the most interesting aspects of the show.
So we've resolved nothing.
Yeah,
we've resolved that Bridgerton season 2 should do cool things.
I think we've resolved that we need to do a part 2, because there's a lot that we did not get to get into.
So many things.
So many, I mean, like the music, I love.
The music.
Have so many thoughts
music
about.
Is really good.
I want to talk about the Empire. Where is the Empire? Which is mentioned one time about the colonies. I want to talk about how they treat Simon Stammer. Well, we can't. We don't have the time today, but we will do it again.
Yes, it's definitely worth certainly reconsidering as season 2 approaches us. So, I want to thank our guests. We had this is probably a long show, but this is really interesting. I'll start with Sarah, who didn't get to say as much because hopefully it's not as obvious through the magic of editing. But you dropped in and out a couple times during the thing, but you're still here now.
I did, and I am, and I'm here, and now I'm back in civilization. I got in the car and just started driving, honestly.
Well, that's cool. But thanks for doing this. And well, it was really interesting because I actually was planning on having Sarah on before, when we were planning a show about like some environmental issues, and then which we still haven't done yet. But then you basically just had thoughts about, around the same time that Hannah posted the blog for this, Sarah just posted thoughts of her own just randomly about Bridgerton. And it's like, oh, well, you'd be perfect just because.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't even get to talk about how like shitty of a tea she made to try to give herself an abortion, which is really, that's like my cup of tea. If we do number 2, I'm here for it.
Number 2. We're doing part 2. It is done. My birthday is coming up, and this is what I want.
Great. It'll be Hannah's birthday episode. We will rant about
more
weird things. Right.
More. I mean, I'm a boy, and I really don't want to write the blog. So this is going to be Hannah, because I really don't want to say call for comments. Can tea cause an abortion? Not it.
That's not. I'm just going to say my birthday. I'm like 30 and 14. We're talking about Bridgerton again. Post your thoughts here.
All right.
There are also multiple articles now from like medical professionals that are being like, no, don't do this.
And the show nicely does have the physician show up, and it's like, what the hell were you thinking? You know,
which made me so happy because like it showed what she put in the tea, and I was like literally screaming at the TV, like Dandelion's not gonna do fuck. Like, right? You know, like you can absolutely. There are things you might also kill yourself, but you can kill a fetus with plants. But like, it's not cinnamon, rose petals, and dandelions for God's sake. Like,
it was also like she was making it from the pantry. Like anything that is in your pantry is not gonna cut it. Like you are about to do. Like you're trying to create something that is literally life threatening to you and your fetus. Like
it's not going to be.
It's not coming from the pantry.
Yeah,
sorry. I'm not a medical professional, but even I get that.
Right, so tune in like 2 weeks, and we'll pick up about.
We'll be back.
Yes, excellent.
Sarah, where can people find out more about the stuff that you actually do?
Well, if you go to ecoboda.com, you can see all the plants that I squish. And then, oddly enough,
I love that you're that dismissive of it. It's like, yeah, I squish plants.
They're pretty. And then, oddly enough, I haven't updated this in probably like 4 years, but I also had a blog that was sarahsexyplants.com, and it was literally about how you would use plants for sexual health and not health. So it's kind of related, which is why, like I said, it's my cup of tea.
You should write a post about that. I mean, I'm probably the only person left subscribing because you're right. It's been 4 or 5 years since you've written anything there.
Well, because I used to not work full time and now I do, and that apparently takes a lot of your life up. So.
How are you working full time? There's a pandemic. Are there parks right now?
Oh my God, they make me go to because I'm trying to teach all of the children, all of the third graders in multiple school districts virtually, and I want to die.
Oh, that sounds fun. That's another show.
Show. Yeah.
I feel like at some point we just need a catharsis show of all the educators just bitching about
the horror of distance learning. Yeah.
So do we want it online?
Nicole, thanks for joining us. Anything you want to plug?
Thanks for having me. I'm on Twitter. I have a blog, although I very sporadic. Or I'm currently doing, if you're interested in poetry, you follow me on Facebook. I'm doing a year of poetry, new poems every day.
Awesome.
Mine just, good one. Not that mine aren't good. That's terrible. So
you try to get people to submit to PCA. They've got like 2 weeks.
Oh, right. PCA, the submission deadline. Oh my God. Now I don't even remember when it is.
I think it's moved to the end of February. They keep moving it because it's going to be virtual. In fact, if you've ever considered doing it, now this is the year to do it because you don't have to go anywhere. So.
Yeah, it's really fun, and any aspect of pop culture. There's like more than 100 different areas you could find something to present in if you're interested. I oversee the comics area, and that covers anything related to comics, whether comics, graphic novels, cartoons, daily strips, film, etc. So.
And I would
tell you, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a lot. Well, this show partly exists because of bar conversations after PCA, which I guess there won't be any of this year, but there will be this show. So
there will be this show. So we'll just drag people.
Right.
February 28th is the deadline.
And I'm almost certain there's going to be a lot of Bridgerton papers there this year. I can't see how there wouldn't be.
Absolutely.
And Katya.
You can find me on Instagram at just that nerd kid when I return to the internet.
When you return to the internet.
I haven't sewn any, like I've been sewing a little bit. I've been sewing some things, but I haven't posted anything since I think like December something or other. So just, and then there was it'll come back.
And then there was a pandemic and Katya returned to her home planet. Palindrome
I mean,
Hannah.
I am headed back to Oregon, so that's kind of similar.
Mav, you know what I want to plug.
I know you want to plug it, but this is your opportunity to plug it.
All right. If you have the funds, please consider donating to your local food bank, because I have nothing worth plugging. And also because it's the right thing to do.
There's a link to Feeding America in the show notes. And you can follow me on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, all of the places, always at Chris Maverick. You can follow the show in all those same places at Vox Popcast. You can follow the show's blog at www.voxpopcast.com, where we regularly talk about whatever we're going to be talking about next week, which I believe next week is sex and superhero shows and comics and stuff. And, it's going to be a really interesting conversation about what are the best superpowers to have sex with and why is it super stretching. We're going to talk about, it's going to be fun. So anyway, if you're not subscribed to the blog, please do. And if you enjoy the show, please subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or wherever the hell else you get podcasts from. And do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review, especially on iTunes. If you give us a 5-star review, not just a 5-star rating, that tweaks the algorithm, helps people find the show, and it makes us feel good. And you can just write about how much you love Bridgerton and how you can't wait to hear us talk about it again. Or you can write about super sex. I don't know. Just give us a review. It helps us know what to talk about next. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you can find a link to in the show notes. This is a chance to not only see the show on YouTube, but to get images of whatever we're talking about and, things that are happening in the future. And, I'm going to pimp something else that's not the regular show plug. This week, as you listen, I think if I've done podcast time travel right, I am on friend of the show, Andrew Dorowski and Kester Dorowski's, their podcast, Disney Animation Movie Essentials. Disney Animated Minute. I don't know. I'm on the Damsel podcast with the Dorowskis. They've both been on this show. They're doing an analysis of the movie Little Mermaid 1 minute at a time. Every episode covers 1 minute of the movie. That's
amazing.
It's amazing. So they had me on, it's weird because we recorded it a couple of months ago, but it's a daily show. So I'm on all this week as we listen, talking about the 3 minutes where Kiss the Girl happens. And it's amazing. It was a great conversation. I had a lot of fun, and you should subscribe to that podcast anyway, because if you think we analyze stuff to death in a fun way, we just talked about an 8-episode TV series, for an hour. They'll sit there and talk about a minute at a time for like 90 episodes. And they do interesting stuff. Like they broke the movie. Little Mermaid's one of my favorite Disney movie, or at least it was, until Andrew pointed out that the biggest flaw in the entire show is that Ariel doesn't know what a fork is, which would be fine, except for her father carries a trident with him everywhere he goes. And she should just think it's a tiny trident. What the fuck is wrong with her? And it just ruined the entire show. And I'm like, but you get interesting commentary like that from that podcast. So everybody should listen to that.
And also some guests you might recognize who are not Mav.
Yeah. Because
30 years of life, did that not occur to me?
It really irritated me. But anyway, so everybody should listen to their show, and everybody should listen to our show. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever else you get podcasts from, like I said. And I want to thank once again Sarah and Nicole for joining us. I want to thank you at home for listening. I want to thank Maximilian of Vox Music for our epic theme song, building ever so more epically and playing us out. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Yours truly, Lady Whistledown.